إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Today then, beginning with the hadith of Aisha radiyallahu anha, قالت كان يكون علي الصوم من رمضان فما أستطيع أن أقضي إلا في شعبان. In this hadith of Aisha radiyallahu anha, she says that there used to be days of Ramadan left for me to make up, and I could not make them up until Sha'ban. That I used to have days of fasting from Ramadan to make up from the last Ramadan, and I would not be able to up until Sha'ban. We know that if you have days left to make up, that the opportunity to make those days up carries on all the way till when? Till the next Ramadan. The opportunity to make up any missed fasts is open all the way till the following Ramadan. Sha'ban is what month? The month before Ramadan. It is the month before Ramadan. So Aisha radiyallahu anha says she had days left to make up from last Ramadan, and she never made them up until Sha'ban, meaning almost a full year later, just before the next Ramadan came. She just made them up in the weeks before the following Ramadan, right at the end. So the hadith clearly highlights the permissibility of being able to make up days all the way up until the next Ramadan. If a person did not make up days that they had left before the next Ramadan arrives, then what happens? Then what? What's the expiation? So the Salaf, and there are several from the Salaf who mentioned that if you do not make up the days from last year before next Ramadan comes in without any justification, then you have an expiation to do. And that is that after this Ramadan which has now come in, you're still gonna have to make up those days. You're still gonna have to make up those days, but on top of that you are gonna have to give the feeding of a poor person for every day that you miss two. And as a Sheikh bin Baz said, Tawbah. You need to repent from this sin that you've done of not making up the days before the next Ramadan has come in. So it is upon the Muslims to make sure that any days that were missed are made up before the next Ramadan comes in. If a person does not do so without any justification, then that person will still have to make them up after Ramadan, but on top of that will also have to feed a poor person for all of the days that they were making up. And as a Sheikh bin Baz said, make tawbah for having done that too. Al-Hafiz ibn Hajr rahimahullah ta'ala mentions here, فَمَا أَسْتَطِيعُ أَنْ أَقْضِيَهُ إِلَّا فِي شَعْبَانٍ that I was not able to make them up until Sha'ban, استدل به على أن عائشة كانت لا تتطوع بشيء من الصيام لا في عشر ذي الحجة ولا في عاشوراء ولا غير ذلك. Some scholars have deduced from this, have inferred from this, have concluded from this that Aisha radiallahu anha never used to fast anything all year until these days she made up in Sha'ban. That she would fast Ramadan and then nothing all year up until these days that she fasted in Sha'ban to make up for the missed ones of Ramadan. How do they come to that conclusion? There is an opinion in fiqh of some scholars, an opinion that you cannot fast supererogatory fasts, optional fasts, if you have obligatory ones in your responsibility remaining yet. That is an opinion of some scholars, that you cannot fast optional fasts if you have obligatory ones left to do yet. So if you have days of Ramadan left to make up, they are obviously obligatory days. The 6 days of Shawwal which come after Ramadan, obligatory or sunnah, optional. Arafah, optional. Ashura, optional. 3 days in the middle of the month, the white days, optional. Mondays and Thursdays, optional. Some scholars say you can't be doing those optional ones when you've got actual obligatory ones left to do yet. They say you have to sort out the obligatory ones first, then you can move on to doing optional ones. As a consequence, if Aisha radiallahu anha never made up those obligatory ones all the way up until just before the next Ramadan, according to that opinion, then upon that understanding, it would mean she never fasted any optional ones all year. Because in order for her to have fasted optional ones, she would have had to make up these ones first, and she never did. So there is an opinion of the scholars that says you cannot fast optional ones unless you've taken care of the responsibility of any obligatory ones first. وهو مبني على أنها كانت لا ترى جواز صيام التطوع لمن عليه دين من رمضان. And the scholars who take this opinion about not being able to do optional ones until you've finished off any obligatory ones in your responsibility, they say that was the opinion of Aisha. They say that it was the opinion of Aisha. She used to have the opinion you cannot fast optional ones until you finished off any obligatory ones in your responsibility first. She clearly didn't do those obligatory ones the whole year until right at the end. Meaning upon her opinion, as they say too, then she would not have fasted any optional ones all year. قال سعيد بن المسيب في صوم العشر لا يصلح حتى يبدأ برمضان. Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib from the Salaf, he has an opinion mentioned related to him where he said you cannot, or it is not appropriate or correct to begin with any other fasting before completing and taking care of your days of Ramadan. And that was when he was specifically asked about the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. It is mentioned about the most virtuous days of the year. The most virtuous 10 days of the year are The first 10 days of the Hijjah. The first 10 days of the Hijjah. And so if you fast in those days, that is mentioned by many of the scholars. Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib was asked about fasting those 10 days. He said, I don't see it appropriate if you have days of Ramadan left yet. In another wording of his statement, it was mentioned that he said, لا بأس أن يقضي رمضان في العشر. He said, no problem about making up the days of your Ramadan left over in the 10 days of the Hijjah. You can fast those 10 days of the Hijjah, but with the intention of your Ramadan ones, not with the specific intention of the Hijjah. That's optional. With the intention of your Ramadan ones, you could do them in the 10 days of the Hijjah. You could do it on the day of Arafah, on any day. But with that intention of the Ramadan ones first. وظاهر قوله جواز التطوع بالصوم لمن عليه دين من رمضان إلا أن الأولى له أن يصوم الدين أولا لقوله لا يصلح. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajr says the wording of the statement of Ibn al-Musayyib لا يصلح, that it's not appropriate. He says that wording indicates that it is allowed, that Ibn al-Musayyib is saying it is allowed, but it's not appropriate. That you should really begin with the days of Ramadan first, then optional ones. But Al-Hafidh ibn Hajr says the wording of Ibn al-Musayyib seems to indicate that it would be acceptable if you did it, but just not the right way and the appropriate way to do it. وروى عبد الرزاق عن أبي هريرة أن رجلا قال له إن علي أياما من رمضان أفأصوم العشر تطوعا. It is mentioned that Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu was asked about fasting the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. A man came and asked him about fasting those 10 days, but the man had days left to make up from Ramadan. So he was asking Abu Hurairah, can I still do the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah? قال, Abu Hurairah said, لا, no. ابدأ بحق الله ثم تضوع ما شئت. He said, begin with the right of Allah first, then do whatever optional and supererogatory ones you want. The right of Allah is the ones that are in your responsibility upon your shoulders in terms of the obligatory ones. That is a burden upon your shoulder you need to take care of. Obligatory fasts from Ramadan. So Abu Hurairah said, begin with that right of Allah upon you, the days you still got to do from Ramadan. Then after that, do whatever optional you want. And it is mentioned a similar narration from Aisha radiallahu anha, indicating that her opinion was also that you need to finish off your Ramadan obligatory ones before you can do supererogatory ones. It is also reported from others from the Salaf similar types of meanings. But that is an opinion, like we said. It is an opinion of some of the scholars. It is not the only opinion. There are others who say that there is no evidence in the Quran and the Sunnah to restrict you in having to finish those days first before you can do anything else. The reason being, what is mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah is that you're allowed to make up those days any time up until the next Ramadan. So in between, if you want to do other optional ones first, that's up to you. So some scholars, in their opinion, they say there's no problem with that. You're allowed to make up these days right up until the end next year before Ramadan. Before that, if you want to do other optional ones, that's up to you. Nothing stopping you from doing that. They say there's no evidence to say you can't do those unless you finish the other ones. Why? You're allowed to finish the other ones all the way till next Ramadan. So you have the difference between the scholars on that. And that is because of in usul al-fiqh as well, when something has a waqt muwassa', there is a certain time frame that you've been given to do a particular act of worship. In Islam, in certain worships, when you've been given a certain time period, a time zone within which you have to do your worship, then it's up to you. You can do your worship anytime in that time zone. So for example, the prayer, Dhuhr prayer, for example, the time zone begins from 1 o'clock, mashallah. I'm not talking about times, talking about the actual signs. After the zawal. Timings of the prayers, by default, you have to answer with the signs. They obviously differ everywhere in the world. So after the zawal, the sun goes past the middle of the day, the peak of the day, all the way up until, upon the common opinion, we did it twice. All Hanafis, the shadow is equal to the item. That is what most of the scholars mention. Most authentic opinion that the shadow is equal to the size of the item. So that is your time zone. If you pray as soon as the time comes in, your prayer is valid or not? Valid. You pray your dhuhr just a few minutes before the end of the time zone, your prayer is valid. Valid. Any time in that time zone, your prayer is valid. So the same with this, the same fiqh ruling. To make up those Ramadan fasts, you have a time zone. From the end of this Ramadan, all the way up until the beginning of next Ramadan. Any time you do it within that time zone, it is valid. So they say that's it. There's no reason to make any restrictions to say, no, you can't do optional, you can't do this, you can't do that. These obligatory ones, you're allowed to do them right till the end. In between that, you want to do optional, it's up to you. Generally speaking, from these opinions, what could be said is that the first opinion has a point of view which makes sense. Which is that if you're going to be fasting optional fasts, then it makes sense that you would begin with your obligatory ones first. That is the general rule with worship. That you begin with the most important, the obligatory, the wajib, then you move on to doing whatever else in terms of optional acts of worship. So it would make sense that a person does finish their fasts and the days that they have left to make up as soon as possible. That should be done. But then a person may say, why didn't Aisha do that then? So then what are we going to say?
Did she have an excuse?
Because like we said, She didn't?
She didn't fast any optional ones.
But then what are we going to say to people? Relax, don't fast anything the whole year?
She wasn't able to.
So again, she wasn't able to. It comes down to that point of ability. Aisha radiallahu anha, even if we say yes, all the statements are correct, her opinion was you cannot fast optional ones first, meaning she didn't fast any optional ones. Even if all of that is established, it comes down to the issue of ability. Aisha radiallahu anha had justification and reason to not be able to fast. She couldn't do it yet. And she only had that opportunity right at the end then before the Ramadan came in next year. There was justification as to why she couldn't fast. What was that justification? It is mentioned about Aisha radiallahu anha, the reason why she delayed her fasting was because, obviously, a very specific situation. She was the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she had many duties and responsibilities to take care of in regards to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, fulfilling the rights of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the best of creation, the final messenger, And as a consequence of fulfilling all of those rights, she was preoccupied from being able to fast. That is mentioned by the scholars. She was fulfilling the rights of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam continuously. She had to be present and available to fulfill the rights of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as a consequence, she did not get round to making the fasts up. She could not do that right up until the end before the next Ramadan. So that was due to a reasoning. Without any reasoning, a person can delay. The time period is open all the way till the next Ramadan. But a person should be encouraged and have that enthusiasm to fulfill the obligations as soon as possible, to fulfill the rights and the responsibilities on you as soon as possible. And in that way as well, you can, as they say in the books of fiqh, take the opinion which is khurujan min al-khilaf. Right now you have two opinions. One opinion saying, it doesn't make a difference, you can do optional fasts all year, even if you're going to do your obligatory Ramadan ones right at the end. The second opinion says, no, you can't do that. You have to do your obligatory ones first, then you can start any optional ones. So in order to get out of this problem and never have this problem land on your doorstep in the first place, khurujan min al-khilaf, as they say in the books of fiqh, then what would you do? Even if you took the opinion you can do optional fasts before the obligatory ones, but to save yourself any issue landing on your doorstep, the easy way out would be to simply make up your obligatory ones first and then do your optional ones, even if you don't follow that opinion strictly. But by doing that, nobody can bring any issue upon you then. That's what they call it in the books of fiqh, khurujan min al-khilaf. To take the stance or to take a position in a way upon the evidences that would relieve you of any issue. So in this situation, even if you don't take the opinion that you have to do the obligatory ones first, then optional, do them anyway. Is it haram for you to do the obligatory ones before the optional? Not at all. Is there anything wrong with you doing the obligatory ones before the optional? Not at all. So do them. Do the obligatory ones straight away after Eid as soon as possible. Then they're all done. And then start your 6 days of Shawwal and do the other remaining days. And that brings us on to the topic of Shawwal. Everybody knows of the famous narration regarding the days of Shawwal. من صام رمضان ثم أتبعه بست من شوال كان له كصيام الدهر. That whomsoever fasts Ramadan, then follows it up with 6 days of Shawwal, then it will be for him the reward of fasting a year. How will it be the reward of a year? Because of what is mentioned in the Sunnah of the multiplication of rewards for deeds. Every deed for 10 times its worth. So if you fast the month of Ramadan 30 days, the reward as though you have fasted 300 days. 10 times the reward for every good deed. And if you fast 6 days in Shawwal, as though you have fasted the reward of 60 days. And when you add that up, it makes 360 a year. Hence the reward of a year. But the point in that is, the hadith says, Man sama Ramadan, whomsoever fasts Ramadan, thumma then atba'ahu bi sittin min Shawwal, follows it up with 6 days of Shawwal, then he'll have the reward of fasting a year. So now with those 6 days, if a person has days of Ramadan left to make up, then can you do those 6 days and get that reward or not? If you have days left to make up from Ramadan, do you have to do them first, then those 6 days? Or can you do the 6 days and get that reward and make up your days afterwards? الدليل من صام رمضان ثم يعني تعقيب, that the person who fasts Ramadan then follows it up with 6 days of Shawwal. The scholars, they say, if you still got some days left to make up from Ramadan, then you have not yet fasted Ramadan. To have it apply to you, whomsoever fasts Ramadan then follows it up with 6 days of Shawwal, it means whomsoever fasts completely Ramadan, finishes Ramadan, then follows it up with 6 days of Shawwal. That's what it means, whomsoever fasts Ramadan, not whomsoever fasts some of Ramadan and then follows it up with 6 days of Shawwal, because if you've got days left to make up, you've only fasted some of Ramadan, not all of it yet. So many of the scholars, they all say that same fatwa, that this hadith, the reward of it will only apply to you if you finish off your days left from Ramadan first, so that now you have fasted Ramadan, done it, complete, then follow it up with 6 days of Shawwal to get this reward. So for those who missed a few days for illness, for the period, for the women who are traveling, then that person should make up those days first, that week, 2 weeks, whatever it was. Then after they've made up those days, they can do the 6 days of Shawwal. In the case of the women, that may mean that they are fasting another 2 weeks after Eid. A week approximately to make up for the week missed for the period, for example. And then after that, the 6 days of Shawwal. And that is how it has to be in order to get the reward of that narration. Other optional fasting, which isn't linked directly like that, then the reward is still possible, upon the opinion that you don't have to do the obligatory ones first. So the white days of every month, the Monday and Thursday, the day of Ashura, the day of Arafah, you could do all of those. But as we said, خروجا من الخلاف, to take yourself out of any issues, it's simple enough just to make up your days first and then do whatever other optional ones you want for the rest of the year. So here with regards to Aisha radiallahu anha, the point was that she didn't make up those days earlier because of a justification in her right. And that was due to her position as the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, needing to be in the presence and to be in the service of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She was not able to fast those days up until the end. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajr mentions a couple of points here. Firstly, متى تصام الأيام التي تقضى عن فوات رمضان؟ هل يتعين قضاؤه متتابعا أو يجوز متفرقا؟ وهل يتعين على الفور أو يجوز على التراخي؟ He says the days that you have left to make up from Ramadan, do they all have to be made up consecutively? Imagine you missed a week because you were ill. Then do you have to make up a week all in one go, 7 days in a row? A woman misses a period 7 days, for example. Does she have to make up 7 days in a row? Or can it be done anytime, split up a day or two here, a day or two there? And the second point, do they have to be done immediately, or can you do them at any time? Upon choice. In the hadith of Aisha, we said she didn't have choice. It was responsibility, justification. She had to delay. Upon choice though, if you have choice, freedom of choice, then in that case, are you supposed to choose to do them immediately, or are you allowed to delay them? Meaning, does the hadith of Aisha indicate you can only delay if there is a reason? And if you don't have reason, are you supposed to make them up straight away? So he says, قال الزبير ibn al-Munir, ظاهر قوله تعالى, what is apparent from the statement of Allah, فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ يقتضي التفريق لصدق أيام أخر سواء كانت متتابعة أو متفرقة، والقياس يقتضي التتابع إلحاقا لصفة القضاء بصفة الأداء، وظاهر صنيع عائشة يقتضي إيثار المبادرة إلى القضاء لولا ما منعها من الشغل، فيشعر بأن من كان بغير عذر لا ينبغي له التأخير. He says that in the Quran, where it mentions that whomsoever is ill or on a journey, then فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ, that you then make up from a number of other days. This other days could be understood as a general amount, whether together consecutively or broken up. It could be broken up. The Quran ayah does not specify that it has to be consecutive days. It just says make those up from other days later. Could be one or two here, one or two there. You've made it up in the end, add it all up. So that's possible. He does say though, al-qiyas, that if you are going to make a comparison, then if you missed, for example, 7 days in a row in Ramadan, then if you were going to make a comparison between the original act of worship and then the substitute making up you're now going to do compared to the original, you should try and make it as accurate as the original would have been. And the original, if you missed 7 days in a row, it's more accurate to fulfill that original act of worship now and making it up in the same way by fasting 7 days in a row. He says that is what is more suitable, not what is by evidence and proven and you have to do, but it would be more suitable, he says, because then you are making up the days in the same way as you missed the days. You missed all 7 days, for example, in a row, so now you're going to make them up all in a row to make your making up as accurate as possible to your initial missing. So that is what he says is appropriate, but not something which is obligatory or you have to. It's allowed to do it on different days, a day here, a day there. But he just says as an opinion that it may seem like if you're making a comparison, that it would be more appropriate to make it as close as possible to the original, how you missed them. But that is just an opinion that he suggests. Also, he says the hadith of Aisha actually indicates that you should try to make the days up as soon as possible. As soon as you're able, make them up. But how does the hadith of Aisha indicate that when she made them up right at the end? Because it mentions in some of the narrations, she highlighted her reason. She said it was because she was preoccupied with the Prophet ﷺ. Meaning if she was not preoccupied like that, then she would have made them up a lot sooner. So it's like taking sometimes they call it mafhum al-mukhalafa, taking the opposite understanding from the original explanation or meaning given. She's saying she hasn't been able to fast because she was preoccupied and the responsibilities upon her. Meaning therefore, if she did not have responsibilities and all this preoccupation upon her, she would have done them right at the beginning otherwise. So Al-Hafidh ibn Hajr says that's what the hadith seems to indicate. That Aisha is saying she only had to do it in Sha'ban because of those responsibilities. So had those responsibilities not been there, she would have done them right at the beginning too. So Al-Hafidh ibn Hajr says it indicates you should try to do them right at the beginning. As soon as you have the opportunity after Eid, start making them up. And he says, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajr, if you don't have a reason, then it is not appropriate and not suitable for you to delay with no reason. Yes, as we said, Islamically the time zone is all the way up until next Ramadan. So it's allowed if you did delay it. But it's a bit like the prayer. The sunnah for your prayers is that you pray them all right at the beginning time except Isha. But if you prayed your Fajr or your Dhuhr or your Asr or your Maghrib right at the end time, it's still valid, but the sunnah was and better was you do it at the beginning. He's saying the same kind of thing here. If you're able, you should make them up right at the beginning when you have the opportunity. But if you did it right at the end, it would still be valid. But better, more appropriate, that you do it right at the beginning when you have a chance. And he says, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, هذا قول الجمهور, that this is what the majority of the scholars say. Make them up as soon as you can. Not delay them to the end. If you do delay them to the end, they will still be valid, but the majority of the scholars say, do them as soon as possible. Make them up as soon as possible. With regards to the issue what we mentioned before, should you do them all in a row or can they be separated out? Some scholars say they must be in a row, but many of them, as they've mentioned, the fatwa is that it's allowed to do them on separate days. But Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar says, the scholars who say it's allowed to do them on separate days all agree that it's better though that you do them in the same way that you miss them, and so you do them consecutively. They say it's better. Even the ones who say it's allowed to do it anytime, different days, they say it is better though that you do them in the same way as you miss them. If you miss 7 in a row, then make them up 7 in a row. They say that is better, even though it's allowed to break them up. After that then, hadith of Aisha radiyallahu anha, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من مات وعليه صيام صام عنه وليه, that whomsoever dies and he has fasting left to make up, then the next of kin makes up those fasts for him. Whoever dies and has fasts left to make up, then the next of kin makes up those fasts for him. So firstly we need to work out what the meaning of the hadith is before you can understand the rulings and the differences of opinion. So whoever has days left to make up, somebody give us an example of someone in a scenario that they have days left to make up. So there's a person who traveled in Ramadan and he missed a week. He was traveling in Ramadan, so he missed a week. And then what? Then he died. Allahu Akbar. 4 takbirat. He died. When did he die? After Ramadan, at some point he died. When exactly, at what point?
Before the next Ramadan.
Before the next Ramadan. Okay, so take a random figure. 6 months later, he died. And he still hadn't made up that 1 week that he'd missed for traveling yet. So now, has he got days left to make up when he's died?
No.
No? He had 7 days when he was traveling in Ramadan that he missed. 6 months later after Eid, which means he's still got another 6 months, the rest of the year, the rest of the months up until next Ramadan to make up his days. He died and he hadn't done it yet. So has he got a week to make up or not?
He's got a week, but I mean, it's not upon him to make it up.
Okay. So you're saying basically he hasn't got a week to make up then? Anybody else? Has he got a week to make up or not? Basically the hadith is saying the next of kin is going to do it. So in that situation of this guy who died, is the next of kin going to make up that 7 days or not? Yeah? Yes? Everybody saying yes? Nobody want to say no? Just one person? Everybody thinks the person has to make up, or the next of kin has to make up the 7 days for that guy.
No.
In this situation, the scholars have mentioned, Shaykh Al-Fawzan for example mentioned, that when he died, for example 6 months after Eid, he still had half a year left to make up those days. So had he done anything wrong? Technically no. He still had all that few months to go yet. And maybe in those first 6 months he was busy, he was this, he was that. Even if he wasn't, it's still valid to do it at the end. So he hadn't done anything wrong per se. It would have been completely valid for him to make up those fasts 3 months later, 4 months later, before next Ramadan came. Therefore, there was no obligation outstanding when he died. There was no obligation outstanding when he died, because he still had time left to do it. So it wasn't, was it binding upon him 6 months later when he died? It wasn't binding upon him yet. He still had another 4, 5, 6 months till next Ramadan yet. It was not binding upon him to have made up those fasts at the moment when he died. He still had time left to make them up. Therefore, it is not binding upon anybody else to have to make up those days for him. So then what does the hadith mean? When are you going to make up days for somebody who's got days left to make up?
He died in Ramadan.
So this same person, he missed a week because he was traveling. Then a whole year went by and he never bothered to make them up. And the next Ramadan came in. Now those 7 days are binding upon him. He should have done them. The next Ramadan has come in, his time is up. They are binding upon him, he should have done them. Now if he dies in that Ramadan, for example, he dies in that Ramadan, for example, then after that Ramadan now, he died with 7 days that were binding, obligatory upon him from the last one. That's what the hadith is talking about in that type of scenario. In the first scenario, they weren't binding yet. He had time to make up and he died, so that's not his fault. In the second scenario, the time was gone. They had become binding upon him now. So now if he dies like that, with obligatory binding fasts upon him, then the hadith is saying the next of kin can make them up on his behalf. There is a difference of opinion on this topic though. Some of the scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, etc., they say you cannot ever make up Ramadan fasts on behalf of anybody else. There are two main opinions. That is one. The second opinion is that yes, you can. One opinion is yes, you can. You can make up those kind of binding days of Ramadan if somebody dies and they hadn't done them. You can do those on behalf of them, as the hadith says. Others, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim, they say no, you can't. Even if they were binding like that in that second scenario, you can't make up Ramadan days for anyone. So then what does the hadith mean then? There are other versions of this hadith, I think you mentioned here as well. There are some other versions of this hadith which specify that it is about making up the fasts for somebody who had made a vow to fast. If somebody had made a vow to fast some days, so it's got nothing to do with Ramadan. Somebody has made a vow to fast a week in the middle of the year outside of Ramadan. Then they die without fulfilling that vow. Those fasts are now binding upon them because they made a vow to do them. So they are binding fasts upon them now. They say, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim, etc., the hadith is talking about that type of scenario. vowing. Because there are other hadith. There's one hadith where a man came to the Prophet ﷺ. There's another one where a woman came to the Prophet ﷺ, and they said, "O Messenger of Allah, my mother died and she had fasts from a vow she made left to make up. Should I do them on her behalf?" The Prophet ﷺ said, "If there was a financial debt upon your mother to clear, would you have cleared it for her?" She said, "Yes, of course." The Prophet ﷺ said, "The right of Allah is more deserving to be cleared off." So the vow that your mother had made to make those fasts, that's a debt from your mother to Allah. So now fulfill that debt to Allah on behalf of your mother. So some scholars say because there are narrations that talk about this issue of making up fasts, specifically in the context of vowing fasts, they say it's only for that, nothing to do with Ramadan. Basically the principle they say then is fasts that are obligatory by default in the Sharia, you cannot make up on behalf of anybody else. Ramadan, obligatory by default in the Sharia or not?
Yes.
Absolutely. They say the only time you can make up fasts for other people, and what this hadith means is a fasting that is obligatory. Obviously, if it's optional, then you don't have to make it up anyway. Obligatory, but not by default in the Sharia. So when somebody makes a vow to fast a particular day, that particular day, was it obligatory or binding upon them before they made the vow?
No.
So it wasn't obligatory by default in the Sharia. They made the vow and consequently it became obligatory. Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim, based upon those other versions of the narration, say those types of days where it wasn't obligatory by default but became obligatory through vowing, but then the person died, he didn't do it, you can do those on behalf of them and clear that debt. But obligatory ones that are by default in the Sharia already there, like Ramadan, they say that is an act of worship you can't do on behalf of somebody else. Like prayer, you can never pray a prayer on behalf of somebody else. They say fasting like that because the default normally physical acts of worship you don't substitute normally. Some exceptions we know, Umrah, Hajj, etc. But prayer, fasting, these types of worships, typically there's no substitution in them. So they say you can't do it except if it's for vowing. Other scholars though, the second opinion, they say no, it's open. The hadith here doesn't specify anything. Maybe those other ones were specific situations or something. Here the hadith is open, so you can do it open, even Ramadan ones. That is an opinion. But the other opinion appears to be more accurate because the other narrations are specific to the situation and they do highlight it is about vowing only. So we'll round off on that narration for this week.